Today, I wanted to show you how to create a question answering bot based on a GitHub repository. I was looking at an open source repo and I wanted to figure out how to do it. And so I came across an example actually in LangChain's docs about using a new vector database called DeepLake that I actually wasn't familiar with. But so as it turns out, you can use that to really easily store information about all sorts of different things, but turns out it's actually great for storing repositories. So we'll go ahead and start by just installing some of our dependencies. But so I'm adding in LangChain, that's a great thing to use to be able to do it. And then DeepLake has their own API. OpenAI for kind of the grabbing the embeddings and then running queries, and TickToken to kind of estimate token counts. And so that'll install all of my dependencies, and then we can get started here. So actually, if you do look too, I added a .env.example file. So in this case, we're going to need an OpenAI API key and an active loop API key. So I was able to set up an active loop account for free, so nothing to worry about there. It seems to work pretty nice on the free version. I think you can do some like self-hosted stuff as well. So that part's pretty cool. And then obviously OpenAI gives you some free credits to use. Should be well within the amount they give you. I start with this sample Python script here. First thing we're going to want to do is we want to set our environment variables. We can add Python decouple. And Python decouple just allows us to really easily grab values from our .env file there. So decouple.config, perfect. All right, and now, so what we're gonna start by doing is we want to be able to define our embeddings function. So in this case, we use OpenAI's embeddings. That's what the example uses. Seems to work pretty well. And so once we import that, let's see, so we don't need a name, and we can actually rename this to just main. Okay, cool. So the one thing it does is there is kind of this disallowed special parameter, which not 100%, like I think it just removes some of the types of characters that you might encounter, but it does recommend using that. So that's a good thing to do there. And then let's see. So in this case, the repo that I want to do is, let's actually use the new AT protocol repository that powers Blue Sky. So this is something I'm pretty fascinated by, and this is what I would like to analyze. And so what we can do is we can actually just clone that repo, and so it should clone into the AT proto directory. Perfect. Excellent. That did that part of it. And then, okay, so then what we want to do is we just want to specify our root. We'll specify our root directory as AT proto, because that's where the GitHub repo clone to. And then let's see. And then so we're actually gonna walk the path here, and Copilot knows me well. So what this does is it actually uses a text loader from LangChain for each of the files. And so text loader just essentially creates these LangChain documents that are nice and easy to use on text files. And so it actually has this like load and split method. And so that kind of parses it out into chunks that are small enough for creating the embeddings nice and easily. And so after that, they actually recommend chunking the files even more. Yeah, perfect. So we'll do it. 1,000 character chunks, and then we can actually use that text splitter to split the documents array. So this gives us our texts. Okay, so next you actually need to add in your username here. And so as Copilot recommends, yeah, you'll get a username when you sign up for ActiveLoop, and that will be what you want to use here. And so in this case, we will do it with AT-Proto. Cool. And so this actually just pulls Deep Lake from the vector stores defined in LangChain. So, you know, it's kind of the wrapper around various vector databases that they use in order to have the same kind of API access, you know, for each of the vector stores, so that they're able to do things with like documents and texts and things like that. Cool. And so now we'll add the texts actually into the database. And so right now we should be able to run Python main.py, and it will give some warnings about chunk sizes. And then this will work on the ingest here. So usually takes a couple of minutes. Not too bad though. Looks like it's going pretty quick. Just about done. Okay. While that's finishing up, I did add a file called ask.py. So, you know, once you load it, then I think it's typically easier to separate out the piece where, you know, you're actually asking questions of the data set. Now what we're going to do is we are going to load that information essentially from the data set that we just created, right? So what we're going to do is we want to set up the DB as a retriever. And so basically in LangChain, we have these chains that know how to pull information from a vector database, and it does it as this structure called a retriever. And so this basically just gives us the format we need. And here, so what we're doing is we're actually setting the distance metric, which is how it defines what you're using to measure the distance between two items in the vector database for querying purposes. So in this case, we're using the cosine method, which is typically, it's probably the most common, I'd say. And so now that we have that set up, what we want to do, we're actually going to use this conversational retriever chain. And since it is a chat model, we actually want to include a memory here. So basically LangChain has different types of memories that you can use to kind of store information in between requests. So like as you're having a conversation with the AI models, you want to be able to store that history. And then, so what we should be able to do is then start using QA to ask questions. And so if we do it this way, we should be able to actually just use user input and be able to ask whatever questions we want. So what is the AT protocol? And that got an error. So I realized with a bit of investigation that in fact I had the wrong data set defined. That makes a big difference. Let's see, we can actually set these back as well. Cool. And so now what we can do is we can run it again here. Okay, so now what is the AT protocol? So now if you look here, it's actually showing us everything that it is included, because I did leave that verbose, and I think that's a good way to see. But basically it pulls in a bunch of information that it found, all mentioning the AT protocol. Also shows like how it uses it. So it's got the system prompt. And now down here, we've got the AT protocol, also known as the ATP. So there we go. Looks great. Now we can ask